LitRPG is a genre of very strong tropes. Even as it continues to grow and evolve, there are certain things that remain pervasive. Some of these tropes have grown to become subgenres of their own, but others are just common conventions, used and reused to the point of becoming a little in-joke. Like how instead of dying in any other possible way, most main characters find themselves reincarnated after getting hit by a truck. But some of them, even though they feel like just another convention, actually serve a purpose. And one of these recently caught my eye. While picking up a number of new stories to read, I noticed that a lot of them started with the main character having lost their memories. Now I'm certainly not the first to have picked up on this, and a cursory bit of research will show you that people have lots of opinions on whether it makes for a good or bad character. It gets used outside of LitRPG as well, but within LitRPG, what is its purpose and why is it so common? And how does it overlap and interact with other tropes? Namely the two I've noticed, isekai and apocalypses. And the simple answer to that is blank slates. A blank slate character is a very convenient tool for an author with a lot of uses. And while not ideal in every situation, they do fit in more easily in LitRPG thanks to the genre's preferences. When I say blank slate, what I'm referring to is a character whose personality, circumstances, their whole existence basically, is detached from the plot they're placed in. The characters are not saddled with prior commitments, responsibilities, or any priorities other than going on the adventure the author has set out for them. They may have a backstory, and some of that backstory may even be shared with the audience. But there is a firm break from whatever they were doing before and what they're doing now. Other genres have done similar things. You often find that the chosen one in a high fantasy finds out about his destiny when his village is destroyed, or they happen to be an orphan to begin with. Fundamentally, this is all a tool of convenience, removing unnecessary elements that would get in the way of the story the author wants to tell. It's like in school anime, where parents are always conveniently working overseas, so the main characters have the house to themselves and no one stopping them from going out and experiencing plot. Any one of these tropes, and a few other options, would serve that purpose equally well, but LitRPG has multiple that are popular at the same time, to the point where sometimes several are used at once. I'm pretty sure I've read a memory loss isekai apocalypse started by a truck accident. While everyone likes different things, it's hard to argue that a large part of the LitRPG audience is here for the power fantasies. A lot of protagonists in the genre start out poor, stressed, and lonely, as far down as they can be to make their rise afterwards that much more satisfying. This is already set up for a blank slate. The character barely has any ties to begin with. When the world ends or they end up in a new one, it's an upgrade to their previous situation. So the main character wholeheartedly throws themselves into the adventure. Having a past you quickly discard is not that far removed from starting with memory loss. Really mentioning the past life of an isekai or apocalypse main character just lets the author provide a little context for whatever technical knowledge they might want to give them that can now be applied to living in the system. And it serves the fantasy of hating your job and realizing that you never have to clock in again. The last part can be a pretty big one for isekai, because having a character from our world helps make them a little more easily relatable to the audience. Even if they end up reincarnated as something non-human, the occasional reference to Earth keeps everything grounded. If you start to research some of these tropes, isekai in particular since it's a genre in its own right outside of LitRPG, you might run into the term fish out of water, which refers to when a character is placed into a situation completely unfamiliar to them. Much like our blank slate characters, it's very useful for an author because it provides an easy method of exposition. If the character doesn't know anything and has to figure it out, then the audience can learn alongside them. Great for LitRPG. After all, when was the last time you started a new LitRPG with a main character at a random point along their journey? I'm not saying it doesn't happen, I've read a few like that, but it's usually for a very specific purpose. Maybe that character is about to lose their powers and you're just getting a glimpse in a prologue like in some video game. Or it's an overpowered character and we're there to watch them stomp everyone. But most of the time, characters are thrown freshly into the system, or if they're a system native, we start their story just before they get access. In traditional fantasy, there's lots of main characters that have already lived a full life and we're just joining them on their latest adventure. They might learn and grow in the process, but it's not unusual for them to have a good grasp on their magic or sword fighting already. In LitRPG, a lot of people are there for the system as much as anything else. They want to know how it works, the levels, classes, skills, attributes, all that good stuff. Which means the author needs to show it. And that means either they throw in a character like the Watson, a character whose job it is to ask the questions the audience is thinking, or they make a nice blank slate character who already fulfills other parts of the power fantasy and conveniently needs to learn all the stuff the audience wants to know about. It's a perfect setup. You can hopefully start to see at this point how it all comes together, how a few different writing techniques used across genres all converge in LitRPG to produce a whole new set of tropes. And we're not quite done yet either. Some of the best systems, both game systems and power systems in general, are the ones people theorize about. They start to wonder what powers would they choose if they could. Would they pick the same class and skills? How would they assign their attributes? Some do so mostly to judge the main character's actions and see if they agree with them, but there are also those theorizing about other characters' builds that we don't get shown, and most importantly, those that wonder what they themselves would pick. In stories where someone already has some amount of power, that can be more difficult, but when you see them start from nothing, it's easier to imagine yourself in that scenario. The character came from Earth originally and knows as much about the system as the reader does. They're on the same starting line. Rather than a full-on audience insert who needs to be generic enough that anyone can imagine themselves in their shoes, by having a character start with no advantages, besides maybe the occasional cheat skill here and there, and then showing the full path of progression to power, the audience can more easily imagine an alternative path. In that regard, there's a bit of overlap with video games. Some games have pretty well-defined main characters with strong personalities, but the player still picks their loadout and abilities. The story belongs to the character, but everyone experiencing it is free to theorycraft to their heart's content. In fact, looking at video games, you could almost think of the memory loss or isekai scenario like a character creation screen. Like in a Bethesda game, waking up in Fallout New Vegas or starting in that cart in Skyrim, the character is dropped into a narrative with things already going on that they're now involved in. The first few chapters of many LitRPG, where the main character looks over the system and picks their first class or skills, is unsurprisingly similar to the feeling of starting a new RPG game. In some ways, games need to do even less since the player is motivated by the gameplay. I don't think it generally bothers people when they don't get a deep backstory for their character in, say, Elden Ring or some other From Software game. All that's needed is a goal to get to and obstacles along the way. The gameplay or the system takes care of the rest. Given the nature of LitRPG as a primarily indie genre, it's also worth noting the very simple practical consideration to all of this. Making a character with no investments and then blowing up the world and telling them, hey, you're doing this now, is just easier. For a fresh author writing what might be their first work and posting it for free as a hobby, getting to avoid a lot of the tricky narrative setup and carefully paced exposition really lowers the barrier to entry. And that can benefit the audience as well. They don't need to worry about getting tied up in a narrative they didn't come here for. Just skip all that and get to the EXP and kill notifications. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it is a lot of people's. Almost all readers want well-written stories and good characters, but that doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. Many readers only care about the characters' actions and interactions, while the larger narrative structures or prose take a back seat. And I consider that a neutral thing overall. It encourages certain styles and discourages others, but content where a deep backstory is critical still gets made, so we're not losing anything overall. In the end, whether an author chooses to use a blank slate character knowingly or not, all comes down to what they're focusing on and the kind of story they want to tell.